During the mid-90s, LucasArts developed and released Shadows of the Empire. This was set to be a game that took place during The Empire Strikes Back and between it that led up to Return of the Jedi. The player controlled Dash Rendar as he aided many of the beloved characters of the original trilogy. The gameplay mainly focused on third-person shooting while also offering a lot of variety from flying and using different vehicles. The project was very ambitious at the time and was no easy task. After the release of their game, the developers felt like for their next project they wanted to have a more narrow focus. Shadows of the Empire had a lot of variety within its campaign, from the situations the designers put the player in along with the different vehicles that they featured. But all of this was a very hard task on the developers. Essentially for their next project they wanted to focus on one thing and do it very well. After a trip to the Skywalker Ranch to view a prototype race sequence that was going to be featured in Episode 1, the developers found their idea for their next project. Join me as we take a look back at Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. John Knowles and his team at LucasArts are responsible for many great Star Wars games. During the mid-90s, they released Shadows of the Empire, a third-person shooter that bridged the gap between Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi, while also providing a wealth of variety to the player through its single-player campaign. While a successful and ambitious title, the development of the game was very taxing on the team. They made the decision that for their next project, they wanted to focus on one type of gameplay and then do it really well. A few of the team members were invited to the Skywalker Ranch to observe the early art and sketches for an interesting action sequence that was going to be featured in the Episode 1 film. This action sequence was described as the Ben-Hur chariot race with jet engines. The developers walked away from this thinking that they could use the engine they built from Shadows of the Empire and make a game on this concept. With a small team of talented developers and a goal to bring the magic of pod racing into the player's hands, the development of Episode 1 Racer began. To add fuel, motivation, and pressure to the project, the team had the goal of releasing the game when the movie was set to come out. John and his team had access to the production materials for the upcoming film to use as reference for their game. This allowed them to include the racers from the film while also coming up with original racers just for the game. And when it came to the actual racing, the main goal was to go very fast. There was talk about including power-ups within the map like a kart racer, but this was later dropped. The developers did not want to lessen the authenticity of the racing by including floating items for the player to grab. The team stated that the environments and its extreme challenges were critical to the experience, whether this was from different elements and vegetation, narrow canyons, or events that would take place in some of the tracks. But the gameplay was going to feature both a boosting and repair mechanic that would be found in the film and work together to create an interesting gameplay loop. The player could push their pod racer to go really fast, but this could damage the engines. Also, hitting objects and walls in the environments would damage your pod racer, but the player could conduct on-the-fly repairs to their pod racer at the risk of losing some speed. This would create an interesting risk and reward system for the player to consider. Watto's shop was going to be featured in the game as well. It was going to be part of the economy system. Completing races would net the player with money that they could spend in the shop or at the junkyard to better their pod racer. The different tracks were going to allow the player to visit many different planets throughout the Star Wars universe. The developers wanted to showcase iconic locations like Tatooine while also making some new planets just for the game. They were given the freedom to develop and use different planets that fit different settings, like a lava planet, an ice one covered in a forest, and others. Track design took up a large portion of the development. The pod racers were capable of very high speeds, and the designers wanted to properly convey that to the player while also having a large enough environment so that races weren't too short or too long. This resulted in the tracks being continually tested and tweaked. The design started started with them working on the tracks on paper first and then testing them in the engine. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer was a more focused and narrow project for the team. They wanted to provide a game that captured the fantasy of experiencing a pod race and bring those high speeds to the players. In May 1999, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer was released to the world. The gameplay is all centered on the core racing. This is made up of managing your speed, knowing when to push your engines, and when to repair and contend with the rival racers. All of these elements create a compelling experience that features very high speeds with on-the-fly problem solving to succeed. When it comes to the racing, it has aged very well and provides an authentic experience. When it comes to the racing, the game is very fast. If you have played F-Zero, you will feel at home with this title. While racing, you will need to pay attention to a lot of things. With the game going at high speeds, you need to give yourself enough room to make the tight turns, avoid debris, and objects in the environment. You do have a health system of sorts that you need to pay attention to. Both of your left and right engines have individual health bars, and are divided into their front, middle, and back parts of the engines. If any of the parts take too much damage, then the engines will explode. When you blow up, you will need to wait to respawn, which could cause you to lose your lead in a race. What factors into this is how the boost mechanic works. At any time, the player can start a boost and keep going to gain the lead. But if the boost is held on for too long, it can start to do damage to your engines and eventually cause them to blow up. It is important to note that it is harder to control your pod racer when using the boost. When using the boost, there is this weighty-like feel to controlling your racer, which gives you some nice feedback when using the boost, but you need to keep this all in mind because maneuvering is a lot harder while boosting. To help counteract the damage done to your pod is the repair feature. At any point, you can opt to repair your engines while in a race. The only downside is that this will greatly decrease your speed and you cannot both repair and boost at the same time. This essentially allows the player to experience the same problem solving and dilemmas a racer would experience during one of these races. When is the proper time to boost, and when is the best time to repair my engines so that they do not blow up and potentially cause me to lose my lead? This system of maintaining high speeds along with knowing when to repair is a really compelling and simple system to understand. The skill comes in from learning each of the different maps, and you are not just learning the routes, dangerous objects, and tight turns while also figuring out when the best time is to boost and then slow down. Episode 1 Racer is a game that anyone can easily pick up and play, and it rewards the time of the player by having areas that the player can improve on to better their efficiency. The risk and reward of the boost system is compelling enough to keep the races interesting, but it's also important to have good tracks to keep the racer interested from an exploration standpoint. The first few times you start a new track, you will try and figure out the best places to boost or slow down to maintain your lead. Depending on the track, this may result in you not achieving your highest place at the end of the race, but with continual attempts, you will be able to learn the map and then when best to deploy your moves. Your first few times on a track will be doing a lot of on-the-fly problem solving as you try to quickly assess everything being thrown at you. These first few times through the levels are special and exhilarating, especially when your problem solving works your first few times. No repeat attempts are just as satisfying as you put what you have learned to the test and are able to gain those higher rankings. Episode 1 Racer does a good job at providing different tracks for you to enjoy. You get to go to several different planets that fit the expected different locations, like an ice world, a planet covered in lava, Tatooine, and many more. There are usually 2 different versions of the same track within the game. The early version will have a shorter version of the track, while the later version will feature the old version with new locations in it. One nice feature in the game are the announcers for each of the planets that you will go to. This gives a little bit of background on the planet along with the race and helps to build some character to the location before the actual event. There is a decent progression system here as well. As you complete races and achieve higher rankings, you will earn both money and new pod racers to use. There are several different pod racers to choose from. Each have their different stats that cater to different playstyles. styles. The money can be used to buy upgrades at the shop along with buying upgrades at the junkyard. These can help to improve your stats so that you can achieve first place in other races. The progression systems are not that deep, but it does provide just enough to give you consistent rewards while going through the tournament mode. The tournament mode is the main event in the game. Here you have several tracks to go through, and this is where you will earn all your money and new racers. Then you will have the time trial mode and the free play mode, where you can go into any previous race you have completed. Free play allows you to play with some options as well. You can choose to turn on the mirror world version of the map, how many laps you want, how many AI racers, and their AI level. While online multiplayer is not provided, there is local split screen play, and it's a lot of fun to share this game with a friend. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is a very focused experience. The game is direct and to the point with its gameplay. The gameplay is focused on racing at high speeds. There is no fluff to get in the way of the gameplay like a story or anything like that. While a good story may have been nice in a game like this, I am happy that the developers put the attention where it really mattered for a game of this style: the gameplay. The risk and reward system of choosing to boost, knowing when to boost, and knowing when to use your repairs creates an endless gameplay loop of providing exhilarating races to the player. The Episode 1 film conveyed how fast these vehicles could go, and this game masterfully nails that speed. You feel like you are driving a machine that is barely held together by duct tape that can go at dangerously high speeds. One nice detail that I like is when one of your engines is severely damaged, your vehicle is still moving along with the one engine before blowing up. When it comes to your opponents, they are mostly there to see where you are in the rankings. Your biggest opponents are the different maps that you will be racing on. Some of the later racing stages feel like a racing puzzle to figure out how to achieve first place. Spending time and learning these maps rewards the player for the time they put into the game as well. When it comes to the presentation, the game's graphics may be dated with a lot of lack of detail, but it does properly convey the speed, and the music is ripped right from Episode 1. While there are no original tracks in the game, there is nothing wrong with listening to John Williams playing as you are racing. When it comes to the gameplay, the game hasn't aged one bit. Like I said before, this is a very focused and direct experience, but one of the downsides to this is that the game can be a bit light on content. I do think this game could have benefited from an online multiplayer component. Thankfully, this game was re-released on the PS4 and Xbox, and this would have been a good opportunity to add it, but sadly it wasn't. If a direct sequel or spiritual successor is ever made, I would love to have online play added to it. If a new game was made, I would like more content added to it, like challenge maps and potentially a story. But the focus of the game should be on the solid tracks and great racing. Even without the potential of a possible sequel, Episode 1 Racer is an awesome racer and a memorable Star Wars video game. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is a solid experience and still an awesome racer to this day. It is really interesting how this game came out of the developers for Shadows of the Empire wanting to make a more focused and direct experience. By choosing to focus on just racing, these game developers were able to create an enjoyable pod racer arcadey sim that focused on the speed from the races in the film. Episode 1 Racer comes supplied with a solid amount of tracks and a simple to pick up yet compelling racing mechanics to master. The heart of the game is found within its gameplay, and this is where the game has stayed timeless and succeeds at showing its quality. The developers showed their skills with third-person shooting and vehicle gameplay with Shadows of the Empire, and this talent translated well into making a compelling racing game. Episode 1 Racer provides a unique experience that is both great for newcomers and Star Wars fans. Thank you very much for watching.